An injury to what? Injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. You can do better than that. Brick by brick. Wall by wall. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. So today we come here with a collective demand for the freedom for political prisoner, brother warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal. Brother warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal has been incarcerated now for nearly 37 years behind enemy lines. I see a lot of people that have been here in this struggle for a long time right now, and so a lot of what I'm going to speak on for the next couple minutes is may not be news, but I want to give a little breakdown for those people that have come out here for the first time today that are just checking out this struggle. On the morning of December 9th, 1981, a vile crime began. The pretext, a dead cop, Officer Daniel Faulkner, and a wounded revolutionary, brother warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal, were on the streets in Philly. Brother warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal, despite being innocent, was charged and convicted for Officer Faulkner's murder. Without going too far into the details of the case, I'll stick to a few bullet points. Number one, there are no reliable ballistics that connect Mumia Abu-Jamal to the murder of Officer Faulkner unless you believe in the theory of magical bouncing bullets. Number two, the primary prosecution witnesses that were used to create a courtroom situation to convict brother warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal were one, a prostitute named Cynthia White, who, like many people in the sex work trade, was perpetually arrested and perpetually encouraged to update her witness testimony to make sure that it corroborated with the developing police narrative. The second major witness that was used in convicting Mumia Abu-Jamal of Officer Faulkner's murder was a Robert Chober, who was under state supervision for having been paid to firebomb a grade school. These are the witnesses, these are the so-called experts and witnesses that were used to railroad our brother. Oh, I see, we're losing the XLR. 1 minute, technical difficulties. Check, 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 okay. To add one last point that I'm sure other speakers here today will give more background on who brother warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal is and the details of the case history. But as far back as 19 years ago, another inmate, a known contract killer named Arnold Beverly, actually confessed to Officer Faulkner's murder, but the confession was not allowed to be admitted because they said it came too late. This is, of course, despite the fact that there is no statute of limitations on murder. So what we are faced here today with is the case of a political incarceration. Mumia is not in prison because of the killing of Officer Faulkner. Mumia is in prison for political reasons. And what are those political reasons? Let's take a look at this for a minute. Mumia Abu-Jamal was a brilliant radical black journalist as far back as his early teenage years. At age 15, he got down with the Black Panther Party for self-defense, and shortly thereafter was placed under FBI surveillance under the now exposed counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO. He was key in documenting the Philadelphia police antagonism's attack and eventual firebombing of the MOVE compound in Philadelphia, resulting in the conflagration in 1978. He was one of the key people in media to expose the government's atrocities and lies, and to support the eventual acquittal of John Africa. And this happened just months before the incident that resulted in Officer Faulkner's death. To read, and just to set this forth on the right footing, for those who are less than completely familiar with the counterintelligence program of the federal government, of COINTELPRO, I want to read point 2, goal number 2 of the counterintelligence program, because I think this is the one that really applies to Brother Warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal. And it says, and I quote, "Prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a Messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad all aspire to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. King could be a very real contender for this position should he abandon his supposed quote-unquote obedience to quote white liberal doctrines, aka nonviolence, and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. This was written too early to include Brother Warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal in the list, but if it were written later, his name would absolutely be on this list. Mumia is known as the voice of the voiceless, talking about the millions of our brothers, sisters, people behind enemy lines in the cages and hellholes of the United Capitalist Prison States of America. Mumia has done more work as a journalist exposing this beast from 30 years of near constant confinement in solitary on death row, and nearly another decade so far in the general population of America's concentration camps. He's done more in these horrendous settings to expose the atrocities of this empire than most of us have been able to do as free, so-called free individuals in this slavocratic society. So finally, going back to the preventing the rise of a black Messiah, let's look at that. A lot of people associate the term Messiah with a religious leader of the Abrahamic faiths. But it also means a leader. It's defined as such, if you look it up in the dictionary, a leader of a group or a nation or a people. And I want to focus less on the definition and more on what makes one a leader as a Messiah as opposed to some other kind of a leader. What makes one a leader as a Messiah is you lead with the truth. And this is what we are fighting for with Mumia, because Mumia has consistently for decades led with the truth. He continues to do so. We owe him this fight because the truth is that truth itself has been incarcerated, and we say set it free. Brick by brick, wall by wall, free Mumia Abu-Jamal!
Free Mumia!
Our next speaker is a man who's been involved in the Mumia movement for a long, long time. He's a leader of the Socialist Action and the mobilization to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Jeff Mackler, come on up, Jeff. In 1999, it was the mob that called for demonstrations here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. The Longshore Union took up the call, and we shut down all the ports on the West Coast, and we marched in San Francisco, and Jeff asked the ILWU to lead that march of 25,000 people to demand freedom for Mumia Abu-Jamal. Jeff Macklin. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Most of you know about the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. The classic term Mumia exception has been used for the past 30 some odd years, 36 years, to keep an innocent man in prison and on death row. Every single time, Mumia's attorneys and the movement pointed out to the corruption, frame-up, intimidation of witnesses, manufacturing of evidence, driving eyewitnesses out of town, and many other aspects of Mumia's case, which indicated the inherent corruption of the police department and the courts and the prosecution, some judge stepped forward to say, well, this just doesn't apply to Mumia, because they wanted to kill him, because he was an innocent man, the voice of the voiceless. He was the single outspoken person to denounce police corruption in Philadelphia when the FBI and the State Department investigated the Philadelphia police, found them guilty of corruption, intimidating witnesses, and jailed and suspended them from office. And the then mayor of the town stated publicly, Mumia is going to pay for his attacks on the police department. Today, the Mumia exception is shining a horrible light on the case. By a quirk of fate, the U.S. Supreme Court last year, in the famous Williams case, ruled that a prosecutor in a death penalty case cannot, if that prosecutor later becomes a judge, judge Mumia Abu-Jamal. In Mumia's case, the prosecutor was the infamous Ron Castillo, who oversaw as district attorney Mumia's appeals, and then went on and refused to recuse himself when he became a Supreme Court justice. That simple proposition, if upheld, would free all of the death row cases and frame-up cases and Mumia's case before the Pennsylvania authorities. But they don't want to abide by the court decision. So they have to find a way out. So the prosecutors, the district attorney, are arguing that they have no evidence that Ron Castillo, the chief prosecutor that oversaw Mumia's case, was at all involved. Let me remind you that Ron Castillo oversaw, in the name of the state of Pennsylvania, a video training prosecutors on how to convict black people by excluding black people from juries. This racist dog oversaw every aspect of Mumia's prosecution, and yet, 10 seconds more, they wouldn't allow him, they wouldn't provide the evidence that is up to the walls in order to get Mumia a new trial. Okay. That evidence has to come forward. That's why we're here today. That's why there's a mobilization before the court that's going to make that decision before Judge Tucker in Philadelphia on Monday. That's why the power of the masses in the street is the central weapon in our hands that we can control. That's why we have to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Thank you.
And other atrocities. We have the pleasure of having one of these brothers out here. This is Jameer Sale from the Answer Coalition, and he's going to share a few words with us. Give it up.
All right, thank y'all for having me. I'm just going to take it off now. I'm here to bring some messages from Sacramento. So the first thing, and I got to be short with this, and it's a longer conversation, but I'm going to get out what I can. The first thing is that the struggle in Sacramento has shifted First, we saw the people exercising their power. We saw it. People went up on the freeway. People were confronting the police. People were making the police turn around. People were exercising real power in the streets. But once that power was exercised, the system had a reaction. The system reacted with its money, and it gave money to certain people who took the money and went off the streets for that money. But people remained in the streets, and they tried to present media depictions that distracted us from the real issue, that told us that it was about Stevante Clark, that told us that it's about the Sacramento Kings, that they care about us and they're here in our communities to help. But in reality, what we've seen is that what they've done is try to distract from the issue, that these cops are still free. While Stevante Clark was in jail, the two cops that murdered Stephon Clark were put back on duty. In addition to that, we know that the police gave over $400,000 to the DA to make sure that there was no conviction. So we see very clearly the system is not there working for us. We have to develop new alternatives. And so the struggle has shifted from a strictly street battle to how do we organize these youth to build something more? How do we develop a deeper analysis of these police killings? So what we really need to bring it up to, what we're dealing with is an occupation by the police. And the fact is that you can't reform an occupation. All you can do is remove an occupation. And the evidence of that, we can see it right now on Gaza, on the border of Israel and Palestine. They're confronting the Israeli military with nothing but their chests. And they're saying that the occupation cannot last. Well, when we're out there in Sacramento and we're confronting those pigs with all their army and police gear, we're saying this occupation can't last. And so we're building, and we're saying that the people are rising up, and you can't stop that tide. No matter how much money they throw at it, no matter how much repression that they throw at us, the people are going to organize, and we're going to resist. And part of that repression that they're throwing at us is targeting our leaders. So they're making sure that our elders, like Brother Mumia, like all the other freedom fighters locked away in prison, who have that experience in the front lines of the liberation struggle, they're making sure that those people stay locked up so that our youth remain without leaders. But new leaders are developing in the struggle, because every single time you see a struggle happening, new leaders are being developed in those hours where that struggle is taking place. So new leaders are coming up, and we have to stand in solidarity with the old leaders who are behind bars, and we have to build the bridges and build these links so that we can continue this struggle for liberation. Because the struggle that we're fighting is not just against the police, it's not just against the city. This is a struggle against capitalism, and it's an international struggle. So we stand with all political prisoners, whether it's here in the United States, fighting against the white supremacist capitalist system, or in Palestine, where we're seeing them fight against the same racist, white supremacist Zionism. And so we stand in solidarity from coast to coast and struggle to struggle, and we hope to continue the fight. And thank you.
Call for this rally, and that is to stop police terror. In the Bay Area, the Longshore Union has suffered 3 deaths of close relatives. 3 deaths. When it happened for Oscar Grant in 2009, we shut down all the ports in the Bay Area. We have 3 members of Local 10 who've lost sons. Saleen Tyndall was just killed a few months ago at the BART station by BART police, across the street from the BART station. Petey Perez, a nephew of a Local 10 member, was killed by Richmond police a couple of years ago. And the third one was Jeremiah Moore, killed in his own front yard by Vallejo police. That's 3 people who are directly related to the Longshore Union. And those crimes by the police have to be addressed by mass action of the working class. It cannot just be Local 10 that shuts down every time there's an injustice done.
That's right.
Our next speaker is the father of Petey Perez, and let me remind you, the police, when they're killing people, yes, it's mainly people of color. But for the ILW Local 10, it was 1 black brother, one Hispanic brother, and one white brother. They covered the full spectrum. The next speaker is the father of Petey Perez, Rick Perez.
Yeah, thank all you guys for showing up. I think about Mumia, and I think about how they stole his life. They stole his freedom. They shot my son. They stole his life. This fight here can help restore what's left of Mumia's life, but there's no restoring what the cops did to my son. There's no other than keeping the cops accountable. It's just, it's hard to put into words. We see the cop the other day who got in trouble in Sacramento County for, he was a former cop. The police emphasize the fact that he used to be a cop, but they don't say anything about the cop committing the crimes while he was a cop. They just emphasize the part where he used to be a cop, which, you know, doesn't do any of us any good. It doesn't do me any good to brag about knowing this. It just shows that they're bad people in all walks of life. And we like to look up to the police as above all this. So, you know, we see what they do to Mumia to silence him down. The cop that shot my son, he's out on post-traumatic disorder. He's getting $80,000 a year, full benefits. That's how they fired him off the force, but keep their face, keep it looking good, call it a disability. A lot of the cops that are getting in trouble are getting fired, but nobody's holding anybody accountable. I was up in Sacramento just the other day trying to get an assembly bill passed for freeing up the cops' records. Right now, all complaints made about a cop are the first complaint because they don't keep a log of it. They don't let anyone know anything of the bad conduct of police officers. And then this cop who shot my son was recommended for non-hire by the training officer, who came up and told me himself in the city of Richmond. He was sent back to the academy 3 different times, and they don't let that information be known publicly. Thank God that cop came up and told me. So, you know, that's one of the struggles we're fighting. And if you ever notice, all these investigations that happen always last exactly a year. So they're unable to put discipline on these cops because they're protected by the Police Officers' Bill of Rights. So I'm just, you know, we're standing here with a Longshoremen Union. We're going to have the May Day parade with the Longshoremen Union against police terror. But the best part is the union of all you people out here standing against this police injustice. And the more people we get, the stronger we get. And we just can't keep allowing these police to do this to us. Like I said about the police officers' records, they're working for us. It's a personnel issue we need to know because we're their bosses. And they're performing a disservice to us. They're not doing the service and protect that they write on their cars. So I ain't got much more to say. I mean, I got a lot more to say, but I better cut it off here.
Justice for Petey. Okay, so next up here is our pleasure to introduce John Parker with the Workers' World Party International Action Center, and he's running for Senate on the Peace and Freedom ticket.
So, thank you for the organizers for organizing this most important demonstration. You know, the cops always tell you, and the lawyers, they say they respect the law, right? But when it comes to laws that they don't like, they don't respect it. You know, that's why we're demanding that the DA turn their files over. They've been sitting on them for a year, and they don't want to respect the law in that case. And this is why I say also that there is no good cop. There's no good cops, because if there were, they'd say something critical about the killing of Stephon Clark, our Salim Tyndall, our Taisha Miller, all the Native and Latinx people who have been killed. They'd say something. They'd say some kind of a negative remark about how the police are getting away with this. They'd say something. In the same case, they're not saying anything about the Philly DA sabotaging justice, or the Fraternal Order of the Police sabotaging justice. So since these pigs aren't saying anything, that means they're complicit. And since they're complicit, that means that on Monday, if things don't go our way at the hearing, then we should shut down these police stations. We should shut things down because they don't deserve to run a system of injustice. And we know, because we know that it's the people's struggle that is key. In fact, Mumia wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for the people's struggle. Remember in 1995, just the threat of a demonstration that had international support made them give Mumia a stay of execution. And that's why I want to talk just a second about my campaign, because that's what my campaign is all about. It's about building the independent people's movement, because we know that is the most important thing to build. And we know that's what really works, because the change that really is revolutionary change that makes a difference, that rattles the system, comes from the power of the people's movement independent of the ruling class. When I say the ruling class, I mean the financial industrial monopolies that actually run this country, represented by the Democrats and the Republicans. So we have to say, for the sake of future generations, that capitalism is unacceptable. So you don't have to accept the unacceptable. Whether it's in the voting booth or on your block, you don't have to enable the enablers. Instead, you can choose to build a movement for real change. Last in 2016, I got 36,000 votes. I mean, that's a lot of people that got our message. Undoubtedly, some of them became activists. And now we need to work to double that, because we know that we want to attract to the movement people who understand, like Karl Marx, like Lenin, like Mao, like Ho Chi Minh, like Rosa Luxemburg, like Amilcar Cabral, like Che, like Fidel, like Harriet Tubman, like Krupskaya, like Leila Khalid, like Lucy Parsons, like Patrice Lumumba, and many, many more who said over and over again, emphatically in word and deed, that this system of exploitation, oppression, war, and poverty must end. And so must Mumia's sentence, and it will end, because we are strong and we're united, and we're going to fight on. Thank you.
So our next speaker that's going to come up here for a rally today for Brother Warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal represents an organization that has stood strong for black liberation, has stood strong for Brother Warrior Mumia for years and years and years. I'm referring right now to the Nation of Islam, and our next speaker is Minister Keith Muhammad.
I'm a witness to the murder in 1981. Yes, sir. 340 law enforcement have been murdered in the last 20 years for being whistleblowers. I got respect for people that are lying about the law.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger. It gives me great honor and privilege to greet all of you with the greeting words of peace. We say it in the Arabic language, Assalamu alaikum, which means in English, peace be unto you. To Brother Jack Heyman and to all that have gathered together in pursuit of justice for our brother Mumia Abu-Jamal. I'm Brother Keith Muhammad. It's my privilege to stand here on behalf of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, an organization with now more than 80 years of fighting for justice here in North America. And if you get our newspaper, which you'll see in the community, you'll find that its principles are written on the back inside cover, with principle number 1 declaring we want freedom. Principle number 2, we want a full and a complete freedom. Principle number 3, we want justice. We want justice applied equally to all, regardless to creed or class or color. Now, we stand here today with you, demanding justice for Brother Mumia on behalf of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who represents the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, the eternal leader of the Nation of Islam, and his national representative have redeclared our demand for justice. The symbol of justice is called by many Lady Justice, which is represented artistically as a blindfolded woman who's holding the scales of justice in one hand and the sword of justice in the other hand. Perhaps a woman is used because it represents the nature in every woman that includes compassion and mercy. The blindfold she wears represents that her concern is not for the color of one's skin, not concerned for the wealth in one's pocket, but one who's demonstrating a greater concern for justice regardless of creed or class or color. In her other hand is a sword. Many don't like to acknowledge the sword, but the sword represents justice against those that have been unjust. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave us a writing called The Fall of America, that in it he declared that justice is the antithesis of wrong, and that justice is the eventual working out of the will of God. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, his national representative, speaks further, declaring that peace is the fruit of justice. Now, Black America has seen more strange fruit in America than we've seen fruit. We stand here in California, a state wherein we worked with many of you and with this group in order to secure justice in the murder of Oscar Grant, the first and perhaps the last in the state of California, where an officer has been charged, an officer has been tried, an officer has been convicted for the murder of an innocent human being. And let me say as I wind this down, because we've got work to do, that President Trump has been declaring time and time again that the FBI and the Department of Justice in the United States is a known lying and leaking department. And if we are relying alone on the Department of Justice to render justice, well, just reflect on the words of the President of the United States, who said that the head of the FBI is a liar and a leaker. So now we have to raise the question and raise the ante. Can we trust the Department of Justice to render justice when they would rather bring charges against our little sister, Yvette Falarca? They would rather target Yvette Falarca than to target those that represent the system of justice itself. As I close, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, speaking of the systems of justice, he warned very clearly that when we face the judges in their courtroom, that when officers are charged with killing black people, in fact, he used the N-word. He said he would look at the judge, and the judge would wink his eye at the officers that have slain our innocent people. And the judge will declare, I wish I had slain that N-word myself. So we join you in demanding justice for Mumia Abu-Jamal. We do not trust the justice system.
Right on.
This is the same city, Philadelphia, that bombed an American community and burned nearly 60 homes because they did not like the independent, free-thinking movement called MOVE. So rather than render justice, they've taken a man, because of the power of his voice and the power of his pen and the sincerity of the movement for which he represented. We stand with you for freedom for Mumia Abu-Jamal. May Allah bless and keep you as I greet you. Assalamu alaikum.
I want people to know that actions like this are not only happening here in Oakland, it's happening back on the East Coast in Philadelphia. And that's because this is an international day of action. Mumia's court hearing is coming up April 30th, the Philadelphia Fraternal Order of Police, as Jeremy said, are going to mobilize. When they mobilize, they go to the courthouse with their guns. That's how they mobilize, to intimidate people. And so there's an International Day of Action today, not only in the U.S., but in Britain, in France, in Germany, in South Africa. And here is a message from the brothers and sisters of Japan, the Japanese Railway Workers Union, Dora Chiba. Dear brothers and sisters, your struggle for freedom of Mumia Abu-Jamal, including the ILWU's port shutdown in 1999, the legal battle to force the court to order the Philadelphia DA's office to produce the DA's documents, and furthermore, the coming May Day action by ILWU Local 10, greatly inspired the Japanese labor movement. Internationally united, we can win freedom for Mumia and Hoshino. Hoshino is an anti-imperialist fighter who was imprisoned for protesting the U.S. troops in Japan during the Vietnam War. That's right, he's been in jail for almost a half a century. So they demand freedom not only for Mumia, but for Hoshino as well. And so Dora Chiba is one of the militant unions like ILWU Local 10. They came here when ILWU initiated the Million Worker March in Washington, D.C., 2004. Our next speaker
Push the button.
is also
Me and the other in the back. Closer.
is also a close relative of someone murdered here by the Bard police, Oscar Grant. Everybody here knows about the story of Oscar Grant. That's why when the longshoremen shut down the port and marched here to what we now call Oscar Grant Plaza, we had not only the ILWU, but we had the SEIU city workers. We had a lot of the youth from the black community. We had a few thousand people here. So to speak eloquently and passionately against this police terror that's happening across the country, I give you Uncle Bobby, Oscar Grant's uncle. Uncle Bobby.
Thank you, Jack. So let me ask a question. How many of you have not heard of Mumia Abu-Jamal? Raise your hand. And don't be embarrassed if you haven't. I would just want to know if you're out here. Okay, so we have a few people. So someone definitely, we have some more. Someone please make sure that the people that are here today, hearing this conversation about Mumia and the issue of police terrorism in our community, share with them. Because it's important that we gather all the people that we can to be a part of this movement. Mumia is very dear to me because, as you know, at the time that Oscar was murdered, he did this radio show that speaks really powerful in the system and how, and understanding how Oscar was murdered and why he was murdered. And he became a real dear friend of mine in a sense of that, like all of you. So I want to say this first. I'm going to share a personal story and trying to bring to you just how critical this is. During the Oscar Grant movement, I was pulled over by the police. One car showed up, 2 cars showed up, about 15 cars showed up. Of course, they had me get out the car, hands up, sidestep on my knees, and handcuffed me and told me I fit the description of a murderer. My heart really started beating really hard. And at that time, I had heard Mumia speak, and I've come to know how many other young men has been locked up for crimes they didn't commit. So now I'm sitting in the back of a car wondering, am I getting ready to be charged for murder or possible murder of something that I did not do? And they let me sit in that for like 30 minutes. And then they came and said, we got a murder and we got witnesses. If you didn't do it, don't worry about it, and slam the door. And all I could do was pray. When they finally came back about 45 minutes later, they said I fit the description of an individual that was Latino in a gold truck, and I'm black in a gray truck. But my point is this. As you know, Mumia was falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit. And today, he still sits in jail on a life sentence for a prison. Make that clear, there's a difference between jail and prison. He still sits in prison today for a crime he did not commit. But what's powerful, and this is from experience, it was all of you that embraced us as a family, that stood with us as a family, that prayed for us, went back and forth to court with us, you know, utilizing your First Amendment right to speak to the very injustice of the murder of Oscar Grant. It was the ILW Local 10 that came and shared with the community that they was a part of this movement and that they were going to shut down the ports for the justice of Oscar Grant. And it was because of all that we got for the first time in California state history. An officer arrested, charged, convicted, and sent to jail. So we, as a family, are indebted to you. I am extremely thankful that you did that. Mumia feels what I feel. He is so appreciative of all of you who have always remembered his innocence to gather and protest for his freedom. I am of the belief that as we continue to do that, as we continue to share the news with those that don't know, and they feel the pain and have watched the system in its heinous act of perpetrating falseness on a lot of us that are locked up, a lot of us that is killed, that we gather more people in this movement. It will be this movement for Mumia's freedom that we can get him out of jail. So, out of prison. Let me make sure I always say that right. Thank you, wife, for correcting me. There's a big difference between prison and jail. Johannes Leslie went to jail. He only did 11 months. He should have been in prison. Mumia is in prison, and he didn't even commit the murder, and he's been locked up for 36 years. That is the heinous act of this system. And the only way we're going to get that straight is for people like you to come out here, stand on his behalf, and speak loudly about his injustice that has happened to him so that we can get him free. I personally, from our family, from Oscar Grant, want to thank you for being here. We want to thank you for embracing Mumia. We definitely want to thank you for embracing Oscar Grant. But we know that if we fail to stand, he will die in jail. So thank you, thank you.
All right, brothers and sisters, we've got a lot of history at this rally here. A lot of history. The next speaker first worked with me in 1984 here in the Bay Area. It was around the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Again, Longshore Local 10 took action. At the union meeting in October of '84, Howard Kaler, member of Local 10, took the deck at the meeting and said, we need to strike against the next ship that comes in from South Africa to protest apartheid, to protest the way people are getting, black people in South Africa are getting shot down in the streets like dogs. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? It's still going on today, but not in South Africa. This is the United States of America. The next speaker who was out there protesting with the longshoremen against the ship from South Africa, former Black Panther, longtime Marxist. Please give it up for Gerald Sanders. Gerald, come on up here, man.
Hey, yo, stall on that, on all that drama. We're trying to have a rally here. Just so. No, you're not. Just forget it. Stall on that. You know what's happening is here. I beg your pardon, sir.
permit me. I'm afraid that not everybody understands the significance of why we're really here. This is not a nostalgic gathering. We love Mumia. We do love Mumia, but guess what? There's a real chance of getting him out of prison now, and I want it to be clear in your mind, because we're not going to go on, they're not going to put this on television, so you are going to have to talk to your co-workers, your friends, people you go to church with, whatever, spread the word, because here's the key. Here's what's at stake. Here's what's at stake here. They framed this man up. They called 100 witnesses to court to frame this man up. 100 witnesses. The FOP, Fraternal Order Police, is in a frenzy now because they can see he might win this appeal. And if he does, it opens up all of the prior appeals. So just get this. In the state of Pennsylvania, they've been acting a fool. They've been naughty. You had one judge that was selling kids. Every time he convicted a kid and sent him to a private child's prison, he received $3,000. This was exposed. You had another judge that got caught with child pornography on a state-owned computer. And then the DA of Philadelphia is in prison now. He just got convicted, right, and got sent to prison. So we got a motley situation going on in Pennsylvania. So out of all of this, Williams, this is the key, Williams versus the state of Pennsylvania. Williams steps up. He felt that he had been framed. He shows up for his appeal, and the same guy that framed him up, Ron Castile, was now the judge. You understand that? You're gonna be the prosecutor, and then later on you become the judge. He said, you gotta recuse yourself. Ron Castile said, no, I don't. And now it becomes clear. When we made these appeals for Mumia, and we got back a statement that says, petition denied, petition denied, petition denied. Now we know what was behind it. And it's so clear what had happened. These people made themselves a career lying about Mumia, framing him up and denying his appeal process. That's what's going on. That's what's at stake. And the FOP knows it. And they're in a frenzy, because if he wins, what does that say about the FOP? What does that say about Castile? Let's keep it. Mumia can win. We're here to support that. You understand? Check out Williams versus the state of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much.
DA judges, stop the frame-up. Free Mumia now. DA judges, stop the frame-up. Free Mumia now. Brick by brick, wall by wall. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Brick by brick, wall by wall. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Up next, we have Yvette.
So thank you very much, everyone. I'm Yvette Falarca. I'm with the Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action, Integration, and Immigrant Rights, and Fight for Equality by any means necessary. BAM! I'm very, very proud that we're so glad that we have another opportunity, because of the movement to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, to have a real and viable chance at him getting and exposing new evidence that could lead to his freedom. We are seeing now in this United States of America some of the most dangerous attacks on democracy and on people's rights, and empowerment of the police, and an attempt by Donald Trump to create a police state while simultaneously giving the police free rein to attack political oppositionists, leftists, people who stand up against racism and stand up against police brutality. but Mumia Abu-Jamal's struggle and his fight for freedom has been an inspiration to many of us who've been standing up against police brutality for decades. Because of the movement in the streets, movements and actions like this here today and across the country and across the world, our political and collective direct action is opening up new opportunities. We need that for everyone now more than ever, because under Donald Trump, we are facing the possibility of genuine authoritarianism and real attacks on democracy and the potential and the growth of fascism. I, along with Mike Williams and Porfirio Paz, we are three anti-fascists who need your help too. We protested and shut down neo-Nazis in Sacramento in June 2016 on the steps of the Capitol. It was a protest of fascists who were Donald Trump supporters and who were among his shock troops, who remain his most committed base. During that protest, over 100 Sacramento police and also California highway patrolmen stood by and watched and allowed those Nazis to pull out knives and attempt to murder and stab multiple people. Many and most who were targeted the most violently were black men, but also Latinos, Asians, and anti-racist activists were among almost 8 people who were stabbed and some taken out in ambulances and who faced the possibility of death. I was one of those people who was stabbed, and I am very lucky that it was thanks to the support of all the anti-fascists in this movement that myself and the others of us who were injured are still here today, and we are fighting for our freedom. Over a year later, after Donald Trump was elected and after Jeff Sessions became the Attorney General, the political witch hunt by the California Highway Patrol, by Donald Trump, and also by the Sacramento District Attorney, Anne Marie Schubert, went into full force. And they began a policy and a process of trying to frame anti-fascists for having stood up against Nazis and against Donald Trump. Myself, Mike, and Porfirio are facing felony charges, felony assault charges, despite the fact that we were the ones who were stabbed and almost killed. We're facing riot charges and incitement to riot charges, despite the fact it was the Nazis who were the ones who rioted against us. And now we have evidence against the police of their collusion with the Nazis. The fact that not only did they stand there and let them almost kill us, but the police have the names and photographs of every Nazi who was present at the Capitol in June 2016, pictures of them with their knives out, identified, and not a single one of those Nazis has been charged to this day. They're walking free. We're the ones who are facing the possibility of incarceration and imprisonment. Join us and help us fight for our freedom and continue to build this movement to stand up against racism, against the racism and the collusion of the police. We have known for years that cops and the fascists go hand in hand with the Klan. We know that. Cops and the Klan go hand in hand, and under Donald Trump, we're seeing the reality of that truer and more in danger than ever before. But what we have in this case that is rare and that makes it so important to get behind is the fact that we have the evidence against them, and we have a movement, like the movement here, to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. We have a movement to stand up against authoritarianism, to stand up to remove Donald Trump, to stand up against fascism, and to really take the opportunities of the naked racism and oppression that Trump administration and his presidency makes no pretense of hiding, to stand up strong for our freedom and for our rights. Our hearing is this Friday in Sacramento at 1:30. In downtown Sacramento, we are going to be carpooling and busing people out there. Join us to stand up for freedom for me, for Mike Williams, for Porfirio Paz. Let's continue to build this movement on a local level as we also continue to build this struggle nationally and internationally to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, to free all political prisoners, and to stand up and make sure that the worst, most authoritarian, dangerous racist, Donald Trump, is removed from office of the United States as well.
To introduce, because we go back a long way in the Longshore Union. In 2002, when our contract expired, it was right after the World Trade Center attack. And George Bush announced that if there was any actions in the ports on the West Coast, he was going to send in the troops to occupy the ports. Clarence stood strong on this issue. And in fact, he actually went to Iraq in the middle of the war to show solidarity against that imperialist war. And I don't have the message here, but there was a message sent by the Iraqi port workers in solidarity with longshoremen when we shut down all the ports to oppose the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2008. Clarence was one of the organizers of that historic action. He's a former Black Panther. He's a militant in the Longshore Union, or was. Brother is retired now. But he'll be out there on May 1st. Brothers and sisters, Clarence Thomas.
Brothers and sisters and comrades, I just want to get something straight for the record. The police department and their association is not a union.
That's right.
They are not a union. Those of us who can read and write understand the genesis of the police department. They started as slave catchers. They always have represented the bosses. For those of us in the labor movement, when there is a labor beef, who do the bosses call? The police. Their interests do not lie with us. The Klan, neo-Nazis, all of these elements are a part of the police agencies, state, federal, and local. That is a historical fact. But let me move on from that and talk about Mumia Abu-Jamal, because he and I have several things in common other than being African-American men of the same generation. We were both members of the Black Panther Party in our youth. That has sustained Mumia. That has kept him going, that training. The spirit of the people is greater than the man's technology. The actions that have been going on for the last more than 30 years, that has been happening all around the world. I was recently in France. They've named streets after Mumia. The only reason why Mumia is alive today is because of the work that each and every one of you around the world has done. I am most proud of the work that the ILWU, initiated by ILW Local 10, April 24th, 1999. All the ports on the West Coast were shut down, demanding freedom for Mumia Abu-Jamal and stop the execution. That's one of the reasons why he's alive right now. This was the first time in the history of the labor movement in the ILWU that we have ever taken action around the question of a political prisoner. We're very close right now, but we have to keep up the pressure. It cannot stop. Let's be clear on one thing. It is the international mobilization of public opinion that has led to this movement and this moment. The wizardry of all of the greatest legal minds could not have brought us to this moment if it was not for the spirit of the people around freedom from Mumia Abu-Jamal. I'm going to round it up. On Tuesday, International Workers' Day, the real Labor Day, the day that commemorates how we were able to get the 8-hour workday, how we were able to end child labor exploitation. We're going to be shutting down all Bay Area ports. Brothers and sisters in Seattle, the largest port in the Pacific Northwest, are going to be shutting down. We want you to join us starting at 10 o'clock a.m. in front of Matson Terminal at the Port of Oakland at Berth 63. We're going to be marching to Little Bobby Hutton Park, also known as the Infirmary. Join us with Danny Glover, Elaine Brown, Uncle Bobby, Cat Brooks, and many, 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 many others. So let's be there. Let's really show that Oakland is radical. Oakland, the home of the Black Panther Party. Oakland, where in 2011, 40,000 people marched to the Port of Oakland and shut it down, saying, no more, no more. I had a senior moment. I needed that, Comrade Judy. We will be mobilizing to march to Oscar Grant Plaza. 3 o'clock? Who cut me off?
Push it together.
Homeland Security must know I'm here. We'll be marching here to convene a rally and march, and then we're going to the Sheriff's Department, and then to the Lake Merritt Amphitheater. All out for May Day.
We don't need the body.
Hello? An injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. An injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Thank you.
Every week has been out front of the Hall of Injustice at 850 Bryant in San Francisco, demanding the removal of District Attorney George Gascon, because we have our own crooked-ass district attorneys out here. So I'd like to bring her up to say a few words right now.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to say that on May 3rd, the 2 years anniversary of the hunger strike, 17 days hunger strike that we did, and got chips served fire, you know, the police chiefs over there in San Francisco. We're going to have a demonstration in front of the police department to demand that DA Gascon resign from office. I want to also say that we should all remember today happily that Herman Bell was free, a member of the Black Panthers Party after 43 years in jail. So I would like to call his name, and I would like for you to say presente. Herman Bell. Presente. Herman Bell. Presente. Herman Bell. I like to say 3 things. We need to organize, brothers and sisters. We need to resist. They're going to give us nothing by just having small things. We need to organize every single area in this city to demand justice, not only here, but throughout this whole country. We got to understand that this is a system that is oppressing all of us, and in particularly black and brown people. We need to understand that there are 3 things that keep this system in power: racism, white supremacy, and Nazi ideology. That's what allowed them to go to Latin America, to Syria and the world, and drop the bombs and kill everyone because of that racism, that white supremacy, and that Nazi ideology. That's what allowed them to murder black and brown young men and women because of racism, because of white supremacy and Nazi ideology. And I repeat it over and over again because we need to make the white workers understand that that's what keeps them oppressed, and that's what keeps them united with the system, and we are not able to liberate ourselves altogether. There can be no unity unless that happens. And to end, I know that we have very little time, but I just want to say this, brothers and sisters. It depends on us to change what's happening to our people. We call ourselves mothers because we gave birth to our children. And they are stealing the life of black and brown children like nothing. And nobody's coming in the support of our struggle against that. Every time we say black and brown, people get angry about that. And we said, no, brothers and sisters, black and brown need to unite in order to unite with the white workers and together on equality fight for justice. Power to the people. That's all I'm saying.
Active in the teachers movement for years. In fact, we've mentioned here a couple times today about the longshoremen shutting down the ports here for Oscar Grant. But the longshoremen also shut down around the anti-apartheid action back in '84. We got a lot of publicity for that, but the important thing to remember about the labor movement here, it's not just the longshoremen that have taken these actions. When we took an action for Mumia Abu-Jamal in 1999, the teachers union here in Oakland took a stand before we did. They voted to have a teach-in on the racist death penalty and to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. And our next speaker was one of the organizers of that historic event, Bob Mandel. Bob, come on up.
Yeah. Put it back in the thing. Adjusted.
That's good. So here's the connection for Krasner. It's the Democratic Party. And Rendell was key player in framing him. Rendell was Al Gore's national co-chair the year that Gore surrendered because he was afraid of resumption of street demonstrations and said so, and this is Krasner. We'll see. I want to remind people of what the Panthers meant in Oakland. When the Panthers were founded, Oakland had the highest ratio per capita of execution by police of arrestees of any city in the United States. And whatever mistakes the Panthers made, that's not why the police went after them, why the state went after them. The state went after them because they patrolled the cops, gun in one hand, law book in another. Because the rate of murder plummeted for 20 years. They went after them for the free breakfast program. They went after them for sickle cell testing. And let's remember that what Mumia and Clarence and Gerald and the other survivors from the Panthers represent was that revolutionary attempt to overthrow the capitalist system and replace it with a democratic socialism. That's what we build on. There are two other things I want to say. The cops actually, long after the teach-in, they have memories. That's why Mumia's in jail. 3 years ago, the cops intervened in Oakland to try to have a curriculum removed from the public schools. It was a curriculum written by a teacher comparing Martin Luther King's later radical writings and Mumia's prison writings. And the last thing I want to say, had an interesting experience. The Chronicle just rejected an op-ed piece that talked about the teachers' strikes and the connection between the demand for full funding, poverty in the classrooms, police murder of kids, of youth all over this country every day, and Mumia's case, and said that California, which is the 7th largest economy in the world, but 41st in funding of its schools, California needs a strike that calls for full funding and for jailing killer cops. That would lead the way.
So we're here to rally not only to free Mumia, but against police terror. And part of that police terror is the terror that is imposed upon the colonies of the United States, like Puerto Rico. Our next speaker, from one of the founders of the Frente Socialista de Puerto Rico, Ricardo Ortiz.
Brothers and sisters, comrades, the fight for free Mumia Abu-Jamal is a fight for freedom for all peoples that are oppressed across the world. And we are very thankful to Mumia because Mumia, from death row and from prison, has expressed his support for the fight for independence of Puerto Rico. We, the Puerto Rican movement, with the solidarity of the labor movement and people around the world, we were able to make this racist system free Oscar Lopez Rivera after 35 years of imprisonment. That means that we, together with solidarity around the world, we can free Mumia Abu-Jamal. The FL-CIO in its 2013 convention approved Resolution 51 that demanded the freedom of Oscar Lopez Rivera. We should fight to have the labor movement to do such thing for Mumia. We gotta depend on the power of the workers and its allies. We cannot depend on the Democratic Party, which is a party of racism, of capitalism. We got to form an independent working class movement in a workers' party that will take power and end up this racist capitalist system. We need our leaders and our heroes. We cannot depend on people like Bernie Sanders that supported the bombing of Libya, that supported the bombing of Yugoslavia, that supported the resolution that was approved by the U.S. Senate supporting the siege of Gaza, that siege of 51 days. We cannot depend on capitalist politicians. As I mentioned, all these achievements that happen in Puerto Rico happen because of the strength of the labor movement and the solidarity around the world. This 1st of May on the colony will be practically a general strike. And believe me, brothers and sisters, everybody that participates in a rally, in a march, in a strike in Puerto Rico is potentially a political prisoner by the same people that imprisoned Mumia Abu-Jamal because he was a Black Panther, he was the voice of the voiceless in Philadelphia, and we need to stop the repression. We need to end the system. I just want to say and want to end by this. Let's end up capitalism. Capitalism is a system of inequality, of oppression, of sexism, of racism. So let's build a workers' party and all power to the working class. Thank you.
Ricardo touched on, what Brother Clarence touched on, something that maybe we haven't spent too much time with today, but is the level, Jack spoke on it too, the level of international solidarity for Mumia Abu-Jamal. He is internationally recognized as a political prisoner caged in these United Capitalist prison states. And one of the groups that has done, there have been petitions, there have been a lot of political moves. You heard about the street named after him, but there's been a lot of petitions that have gone around internationally, getting people to sign declaring their support for Mumia's freedom. And one of the key organizations that's pushed a lot of these international petitions is the Socialist Organizer, and we have here today Maya Schoen to speak on their behalf.
I'm here and I'd like to read you the petition that the Franz Fanon Foundation in Paris began in December. And we all know the value of rallies, but campaigns, particularly petition campaigns, have a great outreach. And it was one such campaign that we organized that freed Lynn Stewart, that actually got her out of prison. And this is our hope, that with this international petition, and it isn't just a petition, there have been rallies throughout the world, once again, to support Mumia Abu-Jamal. So Ralph has a copy of the petition. It has behind it the list of the many international signatories, which also include unions that you recognize, such as ILWU Local 10, and the Committee to Free Mumia, the Mobilization, the Labor Action Committee, many organizations here in the United States as well as internationally. This particular petition is addressed to the Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, as well as to the Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf. We don't expect Tom Wolf to actually free Mumia Abu-Jamal. But Larry Krasner, who was involved in Black Lives Matter and has defended prisoners and in their cases against the police, has a very important role to play on Monday, April 30th, when Mumia's case returns to the courts. And under a Supreme Court decision, which you probably have heard about today, the Williams decision, it shows that the then District Attorney, Ronald Castile, was also the Supreme Court Justice overseeing Mumia's appeals. Now this is pretty obvious for the Supreme Court to notice, is a conflict of interest. Where Larry Krasner comes in, and why this petition is so important, is that it took the judge in this matter to discover that there's a memo showing Ronald Castile's bias when he was the district attorney and was calling for a death sentence for Mumia. That memo has disappeared, according to the district attorney's office. And it is this petition and the pressure on Larry Krasner to open the books and to support Mumia's right for freedom, because any new trial would show that Mumia should be free. As we all know, he didn't do it. And 36 years in prison, most of them on death row. Enough is enough. So I'll just read you the petition, which I'm asking you to sign. Many of you here have signed it already, but if you haven't, Ralph is going to go around with it. It says, we, the undersigned, individual and organizational members of the international community concerned with issues of human rights, call your attention to an egregious example of human rights violation in your respective jurisdictions, the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Specifically, we call on you both, key officials with the power to determine Abu-Jamal's fate, to 1, assure that all the district attorney and police files relevant to Abu-Jamal's case be released publicly, as the Philadelphia Court of Common Appeals is reviewing the potential involvement of retired Supreme Court Justice Ronald Castile in a conflict of interest, as I mentioned before, when he reviewed Abu-Jamal's case as a PA Supreme Court. But further, not just the release of the files, this petition calls for release Abu-Jamal now from his incarceration. That given the mounds of evidence of Abu-Jamal's innocence and even more evidence of police, prosecutorial, and judicial misconduct, his unjust incarceration, including almost 30 years on death row, his twice near executions, his prison-induced illness which brought him to the brink of death, and the lack of timely treatment for his hepatitis C
which left him with a condition of cirrhosis of the liver, which poses a potential threat to his life. We call for the freedom of Mumia Abu-Jamal now. So this is what we'd like you to add your name to, and this will go into the court on Monday, April 30th, in addition to the hundreds of people from Afghanistan to France to Great Britain to Hungary to all the countries of Latin America, India, places now where there have been mobilizations like we're having here today. But your individual commitment to Mumia's case and to letting the people in power know that we will not stand by. We will do everything that we can in every way possible to make sure that Mumia Abu-Jamal is here with us, that he is free, and that he too can participate, not just via radio, not just via books, but that he can be with us in person, continuing his struggle for justice for each and every one. Thank you.
There is someone who's an indefatigable activist here in the Bay Area fighting to free another innocent man on death row, Kevin Cooper. I give you Carol Seligman. Carol, come on up.
At a visit I was lucky to have with Mumia Abu-Jamal in January of this year, he sent his love and respects to Kevin Cooper, admiring both his art and his struggle for freedom. Kevin, an innocent man on death row at San Quentin Prison for 35 years, will be executed by the state of California unless the governor grants him clemency and demands testing of the evidence that will exonerate him. We've been appealing to Governor Brown for justice for Kevin Cooper for Brown's whole most recent 2 terms in office. And there's an excellent petition to the governor asking for clemency that was submitted to him over 2 years ago, to which he has not responded. Several years ago, Governor Brown made the claim that there were no innocent people on California's death row. This has been definitively proven false several times, not just with Kevin Cooper's case. Most recently, in the exoneration of Vicente Benavides Figueroa, 25 years on death row for a rape that didn't happen and the death of a child that wasn't a murder. Now, a sophisticated new technology has been used to catch the Golden State rapist and killer. This guy was a cop, and he committed some of his rapes and murders while he was a cop. This same technology can be used to exonerate Kevin Cooper, who is on death row because the cops refused to investigate the case and pursue the 3 white killers seen leaving the area of the murder in the victim's car, seen in a bar in the area of the murder wearing bloody clothes. One of the killers had previously served a short time in prison for the murder and dismemberment of a teenage girl. Evidence of some of the bloody clothing worn by one of the killers of the Ryan family was turned in to the San Bernardino sheriffs and discarded by them. Evidence that would have excluded Kevin Cooper as the guilty person 35 years ago. Police terror kills unarmed black men in the street and also railroads innocent black people to prison. Police terror is what began the whole frame-up of Mumia Abu-Jamal, Kevin Cooper, and countless others, continued by the judges, prosecutors, and courts. This whole rotten system of blatant racist injustice is a direct spawn of the slavery of African people and genocide of the indigenous people
on which this country's wealth is based. That's why many of us working to free these innocent people believe that the system of capitalism must be torn down and replaced with one based on the working class, the great majority of the world's people, on human rights and justice for all, not just in words, but in action. Free Mumia, free Kevin Cooper.
Free Kevin Cooper. Free them all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Free Chuck Africa. Free Debbie Africa. Free Delbert Africa. Free Michael Africa. Free Janet Africa. Free Janine Africa. Free Eddie Africa. Smash the wall. Free them all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Free them all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Okay, so just a couple. First off, thank you all for being out here spending your time out here on a Saturday afternoon. Really appreciate the love and commitment, and Mumia really appreciates the love and commitment. On the off chance, as you may or may not have noticed, today's rally is being recorded, and hopefully through our allies at Prison Radio, in some way, some of this gets to Brother Warrior Mumia Abu-Jamal so that he can continue to feel and see and hear the support of all of you out here. And so to that end, I want to note that 4 days ago, Mumia Abu-Jamal celebrated his 64th birthday. And so I was hoping I could count to 3 and everybody as loud as you can could say happy birthday Mumia Abu-Jamal. Y'all with me on that? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday Mumia Abu-Jamal! Right on, right on. Okay, so
all right. We just want you to join with us on the chant that the ILWU uses, what we used in 1999 when we led a march of 25,000 people through the streets of San Francisco. And it goes like this. An injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. An injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. An injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. An injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal.